My name is Bill Kraft. I'm president at Concordia College, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Offutt School Presents this morning, featuring today Arne Sorenson, President and Chief Executive Officer of Marriott International. It's a particular pleasure for me to see Arne again, since the days that he and I worked together on behalf of his alma mater, Luther College, which is, as you know, 12 miles south of the border in Baja, Minnesota. He was then, as I know he is now, committed, focused, and incisive with all of you. I look forward to being in dialogue with Arne in just a few minutes. I'm pleased this morning to recognize members of Concordia's Board of Regents, the Global Leadership Advisory Council of the Offutt School of Business, and our National Alumni Board who have joined us today. I'll ask these ambassadors of the college to stand and remain standing until each of them is recognized. So as you hear your name, if you would please, I know that this is tough in a Lutheran Minnesota context to stand up and be recognized, but please humor me. So from the Board of Regents, Corey Holland, Rachel Holstead, Mary Ranum. From the Global Leadership Advisory Council for the Offutt School of Business, Lowell Hellervik, and doing double duty, Rachel Holstead. And from the National Alumni Board, Rolf Peterson and Karen Polzin. Would you please join me in recognizing these people? It's my pleasure now to introduce my Concordia colleague, Chris Mason, Associate Professor of Finance and Interim Director of the Offutt School of Business. Working with Concordia's Dean of the College, Eric Eliason, I appointed Chris as Interim Leader of the Offutt School, following Dr. Brewer Duran's conclusion of her service after 3 years as the Offutt School Dean. We are grateful for Brewer's contributions to teaching and learning at the Offutt School, and we wish her the very best in her future endeavors. Chris Mason is in his 6th year of teaching at his alma mater, where he has been the architect of the still new finance program, one of the fastest growing majors at our college. After Chris graduated from Concordia in 1984, he received his MBA from the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. He served as Senior Portfolio Manager at UBS Investment Services and is the founder, President, and Chief Investment Officer of Fontes Investments. In his turn to teaching, Chris Mason has brought to the college many things, among them a gift for recruiting new students, a thorough commitment to those students flourishing as undergraduates and as young professionals after they finish their college work, and far from least, the strong conviction that Concordia's Business School is rooted in the liberal arts, their cultivation of reason, imagination, and the arts of citizenship. Please join me this morning in welcoming Chris Mason.
Good morning, everyone. Being a Norwegian, I generally don't like the spotlight, although that was a lot of fun. So thank you, Bill. And Bill, you didn't tell me it was such a good-looking group this early in the morning. So I'd like to extend my welcome to our edition, where we've got a great program. It's going to be more dialogue-based, and I think you'll find the discussion open and intriguing, and we will send mics around so everyone will have a chance to ask questions, and it's going to be much more interactive as opposed to just a morning speech. It's a great pleasure to be here and to pick up the leadership that I'm following. Dr. Greg Kant, Dr. Brewer Duran kind of set the stage. And so I'm coming in at a point where we need to take a bit of a different direction, but one where we've got a great foundation based upon the work that they've had. We continue to see strength at the Offutt School of Business, and truthfully, it's up to the fact that we're part of liberal arts. And liberal arts is a somewhat of a misunderstood concept, because most people think it has to do with preferences in politics. Has nothing to do with that for those that aren't connected to the college. Those that have the copper ring, you know about it. And I must say, when I was there, 1980 to 84, when my advisor was saying you need to take religion, philosophy, art, things that, you know, weren't the top of my list at the very smart 18-year-old age I was, because I think I knew everything at that point in time. But later in life, a lot of us that have gone through the liberal arts will understand, excuse me, the importance of what that foundation did. And that foundation brought me back to teach at school. The possibilities are endless with that kind of upbringing. There's a student that found his passion in history, and he turned out to be the CEO of a large healthcare organization. Another young lady came in to be a teacher. She was an English major. She was a great teacher, but didn't really know that there was a spark in her to be an entrepreneur. And she went on to start a very successful consulting business based in Minneapolis and throughout the Midwest. And now she is sharing what her vision is for young ladies by starting a program where they have mentors to get them through the process and connected to businesses. And there was a student that came, he told me, number 1, to play hockey, number 2, to find his wife, and number 3, to get a marketing degree. His hockey career ended his sophomore year, and one of his classes, he did a paper on how important sports was in developing him. It started a spark in his mind where he found the fact that there were many, many people, even here in the States, that didn't have that ability. And so it has nothing to do with playing hockey. It has nothing to do with finding his wife, which, by the way, he did. It has to do with providing the opportunity to spend time in sports where they normally wouldn't. And so he started at his actually sophomore year. And so those are the things that happen when you combine liberal arts with a great business education, and that's really our focus. We've had some great developments here recently. One of them is we celebrated the 50th year of our groundbreaking healthcare program. We opened up the James Park Technology Room, which is fondly known as the Finance Lab. And in that Finance Lab, we were able to have a high school competition for picking stocks, which brought in 11 schools, 61 teams, and 178 high school students. And we obviously would expect to have it grow much more next year. So great things have been happening there. And my next duty is to introduce the next speaker, Terry Martinson Alton. Terry is a 1986 alum of Concordia. She earned both her master's and PhD degrees in congregational mission and leadership from the Luther Seminary. Before joining the Luther Seminary in 2004, she served at Prince of Peace Lutheran in Burnsville, focusing on child, youth, and family ministries, and as an assistant to the bishop of the St. Paul Synod of the ELCA. Terry's research, writing, and teaching interests include congregational leadership, leading in the midst of change and conflict, helping ministry leaders craft a missional statement with an eye towards the first third of life, which unfortunately I'm kind of over that hill a lot, but still very interesting. And in fact, beyond her teaching, she spends much of her time working with congregations and congregational leaders and seeks out opportunities to enhance ministry for those in the first third of life, back to that third of life thing. I'll have to ask her about that. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Terry Martinson Alton.
Good morning. I want you to think this morning about ripples. They're subtle and expansive, all at the same time. But ripples affect our lives every day. We'd been driving on this pavement, and it was where the pavement ended, and we were just about to start on the gravel road where our van stopped. And I got out and was greeted with enthusiasm from this young man. He was probably about 19, and he said, "Are you from Prince of Peace?" And before I could even do anything more than nod, he started going on and thanking me that our congregation had sponsored him for his education. See, he was one of a number of students that our congregation had written checks to for a long time that enabled him to go to school in his town. He was able to go on then, even beyond elementary school and high school, and now was finishing up college. And he could hardly wait to tell me that he was going to be a teacher. And he was so excited that he got to pass on this gift that we had given them and now serve at another community somewhere throughout the country of Tanzania. There I was, in the middle of a place I didn't know, receiving the gratitude of a young man of which I had never met on behalf of a whole community. There is not today an industry, organization, or field of study that does not have global ties and therefore global reach. The actions that we do individually and as organizations ripple around the world. My trip this summer to Tanzania was a way that I was reminded of that in many, many ways. I got a glimpse of a ripple effect that had well long beyond my sight. But it came back to me, and it showed me a little bit of the impact of the actions of a group of people. But something else happened on that trip. I was hosted in amazing ways by people that had far less resources than me, that had a very different lifestyle than me. And I was impacted by their actions. And their ripple was now coming back with me as I made my way back to St. Paul. That trip not only was a chance to receive the gratitude, but now I move it forward in my own work and in my own teaching. Both science and change leadership tell us that little actions change systems. In today's world, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. There are so many things, problems bigger than we are, bad news, all kinds of things, and we can easily just kind of be paralyzed. But I'm here to remind you that little actions make a difference. Your actions make a difference. In Scripture, Jesus is asked, what are the greatest commandments? And Jesus says this: love God and love your neighbor. Today, folks, our neighbors are not just those that live next door, but they are people that live around the world. And it's true, every day, you and I have the opportunity to not only love our neighbor near, but to love our neighbor that's far away. Our choices and our actions ripple around the world. So today, this morning, as you talk to each other and as we hear this, and as you leave this place and go to your place of work or back to your homes or to the ways that you're engaged in the community, I invite you to think of what actions that you are taking, and just keep an eye out for the ripples that they may have. And maybe you'll be lucky, like I am, like I was, to have those effects come back and see what an impact your presence has in the world. Let's pray. Gracious God, Thank you for the opportunities that you give us to love you and our neighbor every day. In these times when we are so ever more connected to our neighbors around the world, may our eyes be open to see beyond our current circumstances. May our hearts be filled with your abundant love, and may our hands be open to both give and receive. In your name we pray. Amen.
My name is Daniel Anderson, and I'm on the faculty at Concordia College and in the Offutt School of Business. And it's my deep pleasure this morning to introduce Arne Sorenson and Mary Sorenson Ranum. We have all heard of the exceptional careers of Arne and Mary, and you probably expect that that's what I'm going to tell you about now. But I am sorry I don't have time for that. I'm going to give you a little different glimpse into the background of the environment that Mary and Arne grew up in. My story begins with St. Anthony Park Elementary School, with teachers by the name of Miss Oman, Mrs. Clark, and Miss Ingebrigtsen, and in a neighborhood with Langford Park at one end and the University Grove at the other. A place with street names like Como Avenue, Luther Place, Grantham, Branston, and Buford. This is where I first met Mary and Arne and the rest of the Sorensons. In my worldview, the middle of that neighborhood was in fact my house, next door to the church where my dad was senior pastor, and across the street from Luther Theological Seminary, where it seemed like all of our friends had dads that worked there. They had last names that sounds like a who's who of the early Lutheran church: Harrisville, Halverson, Rogness, Thompson, Satry, Frost. We were loaded with PKs, pastors' kids, and so the Sorensons fit right in. We all knew what it was like to grow up in a household where our parents had committed their life to God. And they carried out this commitment by accepting a call from the church, the Lutheran church. So for us, church wasn't just a way of life, it was a job. But the Sorensons were different. They were special. They weren't just pastors' kids, they were a missionary family. In the 1960s, St. Anthony Park was the hub for the return of Lutheran missionaries from around the world, from their 5-year commitments in the mission field. The migration back was so familiar to us that every summer we waited to hear from Dad who was coming back from Africa or from Japan for the upcoming school year. One day at dinner, I remember Dad said, Morris, Bo, and Dorothy Sorenson are coming back from Japan. Yeah, they have a bunch of kids. How old are they? That was always our first question. Robert, Mary, Arne, and Michael. Dad said, oh, they're all about your age, he said to me and my 4 siblings. I wondered what they would be like growing up in Japan. And I was also deeply impacted by my dad's respect for missionaries. Now, I want to tell you, my dad, Pastor Bob, happens to be a 1949 Cobber, was, I would say, plain and simply, I think one of the best parish pastors there ever was. I can't imagine anyone working harder or longer hours than my dad. But he often expressed that his work was nothing compared to the sacrifice of the missionaries. So many of them, he had told us, returned from the war, World War II. Returned home, finished college, got married, attended the seminary, and then the call to mission came out from the church, the Lutheran church, to open up mission fields across the world. Madagascar, Japan. Those that accepted the call left everything behind. They took their wife, they took their families, and most of them had both, and they served the 5-year commitments halfway across the world. Now that was service. Just last week, I was visiting with Mom about this. She remembers Dad saying years ago that he could have done more. He could have been a missionary. So I didn't know what to expect when the Sorensons were coming back from Japan. Turns out They were pretty normal. And so it was in 4th grade that I met Mary Sorenson. We were together in Mrs. Clark's class. Arne was younger. He was only in 2nd grade. My brother Mark was in 5th grade. Robert Sorenson was in 6th. Our little brothers weren't in school yet, but 2 years later, when Mary and I were in Miss Oman's 6th grade class, Arne was in Miss Ingebrigtsen's 4th grade. Our 2 brothers, Steve and Michael, started kindergarten in Miss Herman's class. So the Sorensons lived on the other side of the seminary from us, 1521 Branston, in a row of houses that overlooked the seminary. And just in case you don't think I did my research for this, I'm wondering, does the number 645-5047 mean anything to you? Between us was a seminary, and it might surprise you that this was a great playground for a bunch of kids. The lawn out front was our baseball and football field. There was a climbing tree at the bottom of the hill below Branston, a long sidewalk that began at the cross that we had skateboard down to Como Avenue. And the buildings of the seminary, I almost shouldn't say this, but they were a great place to explore if you knew where that window that was never locked. I don't have time for the more growing up stories, but I think of those days where I grew up and Arne and Mary and the Sorensons grew up as kind of like the Sandlot or the Wonder Years, an adolescence that shaped our lives from that point forward. Well, we continued to grow up. The Andersons moved to Moorhead. We didn't keep in touch with the Sorensons. I graduated from high school and traveled an entire block to go to school. And on the first day of college on orientation, I looked over and surprise, Mary Sorenson was there. Well, back then, like today, how comforting it is to see childhood friends, people that were good as kids and are now great as adults. Arne and Mary, as I look at our common heritage, I think we can thank our neighborhood and our school and our church and most of all our parents for how we turned out. Of course, I'm no longer surprised to see Mary at Concordia events. Did I mention she's on the Board of Regents? And we have a big reunion coming up this fall. I'll let you do the numbers. It's 1978 that we graduated. And of course, Mary is now chair of the board of Frederickson and Byron. And Arne, I guess he didn't want to be the little kid at the school with his older siblings, and he went to Luther College, just like his dad. I haven't seen Arne in a long, long time. So when I think of him, I still imagine one of the little kids running around the neighborhood or the school or the fellowship hall. I do believe that while Arne may still have some of the old neighborhood in him, he's not a little kid anymore. And so it's my privilege this morning to introduce to you the president and CEO of Marriott International and a fellow graduate of St. Anthony Park Elementary School, Arne Sorenson.
Well, thank you, Dan. That was a great introduction.
It's not often you hear somebody know your elementary school teachers better than you do.
Yeah. I do remember Miss Oman, though. I remember one time all the boys had to leave, and no, that was the next year when we had a man teacher. Do you remember? And all the boys had to leave, and a woman teacher came in to tell all the girls how to sit because we were not sitting as appropriate little girls.
And now look at you.
Now look at me, I'm sitting. I'm sitting as an appropriate little girl, right? So, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Arne, for coming. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to be in one of the newest hotels in the Twin Cities of Marriott, and I hope you all go to Marriott hotels from time to time. So Arne's been interviewed all over the world and many, many times, but I think this is the first time you've been interviewed by a sibling.
That's true.
Is that true?
Yeah.
So we're going to give this a try. We talked last weekend, and I said, Arne, do you want to give a speech? No, let's just talk. So that's what we're going to try this morning. Arne Our advertised topic is leading a global company in the age of rising nationalism. We're going to get to that topic, but I thought we'd maybe talk about a few other things before we got there, so bear with us. Just as a little background, and Arne might tell you this, but I'm just going to tell you this. Marriott International is the largest global lodging company in the world, and Arne became CEO in 2012. It has more than 6,500 properties in 127 countries and territories, and in 2017 reported revenues of $22 billion. So, let's start with some questions. Dan helped us get going on my first question, but why don't you talk about how our growing up years and our parents and their sense of mission impacts you and your role at Marriott?
And then his breakout.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's great listening to Daniel's introduction. His job, or his father's job, Pastor Bob, was a lot like a college president, I think, with the faculty. There were 50 plus ordained members of St. Anthony Park Lutheran Church. And for the pastor to give sermons to that group every Sunday, the seminary faculty, ALC brass, missionaries back from breaks, pastors literally everywhere, each with their own point of view about how to be the best pastor. And here a sort of fearless pastor steps forward and delivers a sermon every Sunday morning to minister to pastors. A very interesting sort of challenge. There was a fearlessness, I think, that came from our parents. Father born and raised near Madison, Wisconsin. Mother mostly grew up in Newman Grove, Nebraska. Dad went and signed up for the Army as a 17-year-old and ended up in Japan in 1945, fortunately just as the war was ending, but was there 45 to 46, came back to Luther College and Luther Seminary, and then goes back to Japan with our mother, who of course had never been overseas, and other than my dad's Army service, he had never been overseas.
Imagine getting married and going off to Japan and saying goodbye to your family for 6 years.
No telephones, and we almost can't imagine it today because we think of the world as it has shrunk. Japan is part of the developed world. This was a forever distance away from home, totally foreign. The place had been bombed to smithereens, and it was really back to the developing world. Even when we come back to St. Paul, the little crap at the school fairs, I don't know if you remember, Mary, the little plastic toys, you know, the thing with the little fishing thing, you'd hit the button and it would try and grab a little fish out of one of the pockets. All of that stuff was made in Japan. Today it's probably made in Bangladesh or someplace else. But Japan was the place that was struggling to come back. And I think that fearlessness in some respects is the thing that I most want to emulate from them. This notion that you can go anywhere and just do whatever it is that you need to do. I think there's a piece too, which is we were foreigners in a different place. We had a tiny little cottage, summer cottage, where we would go every summer near Lake Nojiti, where the Olympics were held, near Nagano. And there's a big sign over the road as you entered. It said Gaijin Mura, which meant foreigners' village. And so that was a little enclave where the Japanese basically said, this is where the Gaijin go. This is not where the Japanese go. And we lived sort of between two worlds. Our parents both, though, became fluent in Japanese. My father read Japanese in kanji, preached, of course, in Japanese every Sunday morning. And we came back sort of with that as one of our family cultural attributes. Of course, the Scandinavian thing, the Lutheran thing, but her comfort food, our comfort food, has always been sushi or sukiyaki or whatever exotic Japanese food we can get.
Just yesterday there was an article in the New York Times about making sukiyaki, and Mike forwarded it to me and said, thought you'd like to see this article. So it's still that we're still there. Yeah. So you go to Luther College in Iowa. And from there, you roamed around a little bit, and ultimately you became CEO of Marriott. Talk about that journey. He needs to fill in the whole middle, you see.
Well, a couple of Lutheran college stories first, maybe. Some of these I think are politically incorrect, but Dad used to say Luther College is a place where men are men and the women are glad of it.
Wouldn't say that today.
I just did.
You did.
And nobody really laughed.
No.
In truth, I'm not really sure I know what he meant by it.
Yeah.
He would also say, your brain is half lonesome or something like that. Was some comment like that. In any event, he went to Luther. Both of my grandfathers went to Luther. Mary was already at Concordia. I know I went to visit Mary at Concordia one Saturday morning. I think she was a sophomore. Or junior maybe. And I was in her dorm room on a Saturday morning and got busted.
At the time, there were rules about when boys could be in girls' rooms, and he was in my room, and I'm with my sister. Are you kidding? But it was these schools were very close to each other in so many respects. Maybe not by distance, but in terms of sensibility. Great places to grow up. Great places to study and learn. Liberal arts was sort of rich with feeding your curiosity. You could participate in anything you wanted to, sports and choir and travel abroad, all of those sorts of things. Probably the most significant single experience I had at Luther was going to Beirut in the summer of 1979. Lebanon was in civil war. It was an extraordinarily rough place and a dangerous place. But our dad had been at a World Council of Churches meeting in Cyprus the summer before, came back, or sometime during the school year, came back and said, there's going to be a little gathering in Beirut next summer. I think you should go. Imagine telling your son to go to a war zone.
Go to a war zone.
And
I actually think he thought it was a good thing, not sort of penalizing me for doing something wrong at home. But it was a sort of a push out the door to, again, a place for me which was totally eye-opening. Gunfire every night. Went to see I know a Clint Eastwood movie one night in a theater in Beirut, and the people in the row behind us shot pistols into the ceiling at the exciting points of the movie. Guns literally everywhere. And in a sense, it fed a wanderlust I've probably always had. Ruth, my wife, who's here this morning, thank you for being here. It's great to have you in the front row. Has quite a bit of that too. But we left the Midwest, got married, moved to New York, and then to Washington for law practice in the first instance at Latham & Watkins. Did that for about a dozen years. Marriott was a client. And a few years after representing Marriott, Bill Marriott said, why don't you come out to the company? I said, I will, but not to be a lawyer. He said, okay, come on out. And so that was the entire plan. There was no more planning than that. And surprise, surprise, I ended up taking his job.
So you mentioned you went to the University of Minnesota Law School. In fact, little fun fact, Arne and I and my husband Mike's brother Bert were all classmates at the University of Minnesota Law School. So I was really lucky to go to law school with my brother and my brother-in-law. And I have a bunch of my colleagues and clients in this table right here. Talk about how your training and experience as a litigator impacts how you lead Marriott. Does it have anything to do with it?
Maybe hard to know exactly. I'm apparently an awful client as a legal matter. So the lawyers come in and sort of say, okay, here we got to go talk to this once upon a time lawyer who thinks he knows something about practicing law. But in maybe more fairly, trying cases is telling stories. And particularly if you've got a jury, to get to a jury, you need to know what is the story I'm going to tell. And the old trial lawyer adage is, if I get a chance to write the facts or the law, I'm always going to write the facts. Because if you can write the facts in a way that are powerful enough as a story, people will try and make the law fit the facts. And you've got to tell that story. And I think in many respects what we do at Marriott every day. And we got a table over here of Marriott general managers and other senior leaders. Thanks for taking the time this morning. But our folks around the world, starting particularly with the general managers, who are the most important people we have, are working at making stories for folks. We all love to travel. We love to travel because it gives us memories, because we're engaged somehow either in work or in personal matters when we go around the world. And we want to make sure that we're there sort of creating that story. And when you get above the creation of stories, it's also about telling stories. We have about 700,000 people that wear our name badge every day around the world, and they want to connect with the company, they want to connect with the industry, they want to connect with their hotels, they want to connect with leadership across the company, and the way you do that is really about telling stories. It might be a story about what we think our future is, it might be a story about our past, it might be a story about what happened at the JW Marriott in Minneapolis last night.
So I want to now talk more about the company. I said Marriott is the largest hotel company. What makes Marriott unique? When you talk about Marriott, how do you distinguish it from other hotel companies? What's the vision?
Well, there are a number of things. The biggest asset that came with, or comes with this company is its history. 91 years this year. Founding story is a quintessential American story. J.W. and Alice Marriott, born and raised in Utah, drive across the country in 1927 to Washington, D.C. Takes them 11 days because of the state of the roads at the time. And they open a 9-stool A&W root beer stand in the heart of Washington, D.C. That's a summertime open. They get to the first winter, nothing like Minnesota winters, of course, but selling root beer in the winter is not a very great idea. So Mrs. Marriott goes to the Mexican embassy and gets recipes for hot tamales and chili, and she puts burgers on the menu and starts something called the Hot Shops, which was the first restaurant chain, if you will, in the Washington area. And the company gets into this restaurant business first for 30 years and then trips into the hotel business. But from the beginning, it was not only a classic entrepreneurial story seeking opportunity, but it was a place where the founders thought, we can only do well if we take care of our people. And so they put a doctor on staff during the Great Depression because people don't have medical care. And they build a culture which is about careers for people, which is about keeping them there, which is about growth and opportunities. And that culture, we just use the shorthand take care today, but take care of your people, the people will take care of the guests, and the guests will come back again and again, is still the thing that principally moves us. My first experience in the Marriott boardroom was when I was representing them from Latham & Watkins. This would have been in 1992, I suppose. And the conversation in the boardroom has always been about how far somebody has gone in their career, not about their pedigree. And in many boardrooms, what you will hear people say is, well, you know, they went to Harvard Business School. Which of course is a perfectly fine school, and they produce great talent. But the conversation in the Marriott boardroom is, you know, that he or she started as a housekeeping manager, or started as a security guard, or started as a waiter in the restaurant, and look at what they've accomplished in their career. And that pursuit of opportunity for folks, and that bragging about opportunity for folks, makes it very people-centric, and I think quite distinct from most of our competitors.
Often when your history and Bill Marriott's history are described in the press, it says, from humble beginnings, as to both of you, which I always think is...
I think my beginnings were more humble than Bill's. Yeah. Now Bill is 86 today, but he is this one of two sons of the founders of the company, and by the time he's coming along, the company is not as big as it is today, but is a substantial company.
It's not quite as humble. So Dan, I did a little research too, and I was told that Marriott is a matrix organization with businesses distributed geographically around the world, and so you have separate presidents for the Americas, the Caribbean, Latin America, Canada, Europe, Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. And each of those units is responsible for the hotels in their market. So talk about how you manage a company that's this big and this widespread and all over everywhere. How does that work?
So we maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I started at Marriott in 1996 and was CFO for a decade or so, and then became president. As I was becoming president, before becoming CEO, it was obvious to me that the organization wasn't running very well. Essentially, every discipline had to come back into our headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland to be resolved, which meant that Bill Marriott, the CEO, had to resolve any dispute between development, for example, responsible for bringing new hotels in the system, and operations, who was responsible for operating the hotels once they were in the system. And it came clear, there was a hotel doesn't really make that much difference, but there was a Courtyard hotel prospect in Hong Kong, on Victoria Island, now Hong Kong Island, former office building being converted to a hotel. And the fundamental question was a really basic one: are there enough elevators to service the rooms? Well, you had operations saying, no, there are not enough elevators. You had development biased towards always adding hotels saying, no, there are plenty of elevators. Bill Marriott had to decide from Bethesda whether there were enough elevators in a Courtyard prospect in Hong Kong. Does Bill Marriott make that decision any better than somebody on the ground in Hong Kong? Are you kidding? He'd never seen the box. He'd, of course, been to Hong Kong, but he's got no inherent insight into that question. And so we decided, let's distribute the authority from the headquarters, put integrated teams around the world who would make decisions better and faster. By the way, they'd enjoy their jobs more, and they'd be more likely to be candidates to be senior executives in the company, because they would have the obligation and the authority to resolve the inherent conflicts, which is where the toughest decisions are. And so we really, in a sense, distributed authority, reduced the authority of the center. I remember going into Mr. Marriott's office the week before we were doing this, and I said, you understand what we're doing, don't you? Are you okay with this? Because you've had the power to make every decision. And he said, yeah, I get it, it's fine. The company's so big, I haven't been able to make every decision as it is. I just want to get involved so people know the details are important. And so, it's worked. It's worked pretty well. The first number of years, we still had all these instincts which were built from history, where folks in the headquarters building would say, well, wait a second, why can't I make that decision? And we had folks in the continents who would say, wait, don't I get this power? Don't I have the right to do this? And we've worked through that in a way that is really pretty gratifying, and makes my job actually doable. If I were to think about all that stuff coming back to my desk, it would be impossible.
So I want to talk now about the advertised topic. Talk about the challenges you face in this geopolitical world that we're in today, in the global world that Terry talked about this morning. What's the biggest challenge that is in front of the company at being all over the world?
The biggest challenge in this regard, I don't think the biggest challenge is about the globe. I think the biggest challenge is about how divided we are, and how unwilling we are to engage deeply in conversation. So I'll take one hotel. This was sometime last fall, I think. We have a hotel near the airport, Washington, D.C. National Airport, in Crystal City. And the Marriott in Crystal City had, for a number of years, hosted the annual meeting of the Center for CAIR, Center for American Islamic Relations. And every year around the time that the CAIR meets in the hotel, I would get emails and letters demanding that we cancel their meeting because they were pro-Arab and anti-American. And that's been the case maybe for the last 3 or 4 years. Preceded the election of Trump, but has gotten more more pronounced since the election. Last year there was another group called Act for America that was holding another meeting in the same hotel, not the same days, but Act for America was viewed as a hate group, anti-Arab group. Somebody wrote me a letter published in the New York Times demanding that we cancel their meeting because by letting them meet in our hotel, we were implicitly endorsing them. And in each of those circumstances, it varies a little bit by precise time, but there can be so much email traffic, for example, that your email is rendered useless. Messages coming in every few seconds. So while you sleep, you wake up and there are 8,000 messages basically demanding that you do all this. And of course, I said, in response to the one formal demand that we cancel Act for America, no, we will not cancel it. We are not going to sit in judgment on the views of the people who meet in or use our hotels. We're not going to sit in judgment on the views of our associates. We believe we are a community of highly diverse people that have every political point of view but come from every place imaginable in terms of our identities, race, religion, sexual orientation, all aspects of identity. Everybody has got to be welcome in the business. We're in the hospitality business, for goodness sakes. And do we really want to, does anybody really want us to sit in judgment on whether one person's views are okay to be in our hotel and not another? And that's a specific example, but it pops up now everywhere. And so if we say something about immigration, we say something about LGBT inclusiveness, we say something about travel policy to the United States, we will be criticized by somebody. And maybe there will be a request to boycott us. We ended up last year, another story fairly recent, on the Sean Hannity show. Somehow Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow got into a tiff. Maybe that happens every day, I don't know. I actually don't really watch either one of them because I find them each a little bit polarizing. But they got into a tiff, I think, about a Democratic campaign operative of some sort that Hannity said had fabricated something and Maddow said had not. And they started asking each of their loyal followers to boycott the other. It turned out that a Marriott commercial popped up in an online viewing of Hannity's show. And the way commercials are bought online is there's not somebody sitting at Marriott headquarters and saying, let's buy an ad on Hannity's show. It's instead something in Facebook's algorithms or Google's algorithms or whatever it is. And if you've clicked on your computer and you're watching this and they have some data that says maybe you're going to travel, whatever it is, maybe a Marriott banner ad shows up. Anyhow, Maddow sees that and says, we want to boycott Marriott. Hannity sees it, let's boycott Maddow. And suddenly Marriott is in the middle of something we had no business being in the middle of whatsoever. But it pops, you all see this, I'm sure, in what you're doing every day. We are putting these labels on each other that prevent us from ever seeing who we're with. Because we say, oh, well, that's a Trump supporter, or that's an anti-Trump person, or they're pro-immigration, or whatever label it is we put on them, and then we basically say, okay, well, you're different from me in that regard, so therefore, get lost. I'm not going to talk to you. And we work constantly, not just to try and navigate the external environment, so we don't get mistakenly wrapped up in this stuff. Sometimes we deliberately have to get into this stuff because we know we need to say something about it. But we work internally too to basically say, no, we mean what we stand for. Everybody's welcome.
So does this happen, the examples you just gave were examples in the United States.
Yeah.
Do you see this happen in the rest of the world too?
Much, much less. Certainly less from a consumer-driven perspective, we had an episode in China in January, which we describe internally as a labeling issue, but it's a different kind of labeling than the way I just used the word. We had a customer survey that was delivered online to a few thousand customers, and in many of these forms that you fill out online, it'll ask for your state and country, and you click on a box, and there's a list of countries, and you just pick the one you're from. Our list, which came from a third-party vendor, included not just Taiwan and Hong Kong in a country list, but actually included Tibet in a country list. In China, that is an extraordinarily sensitive topic. And the numbers in China, of course, are huge. So we woke up one morning and there were 50 million social media postings about how Marriott had implicitly described Tibet as a country, independent country. And we ended up having to sort of navigate through that. But that was a different kind of thing in some respects than this sort of social warfare that we've got going on here.
So I want to be respectful of the fact that we said we would have time for the audience to ask questions. I'm going to ask one last question and give you a chance to talk about what's next for Marriott.
There's so much happening. I don't like to talk too much about our statistics just because we don't necessarily want to be an advertisement here, but we're opening a hotel roughly every 13 hours for the next 3 years. It gives you a sense of what the team has got to accomplish and how you can't lose sight of the sort of the least interesting stuff. And I don't mean it's uninteresting. To me, it's fascinating. But opening a new hotel every day is just doing our regular work. And to do that well means finding the right leadership for every hotel and making sure that they open on strategy with the right kind of service and the right kind of product, making sure we're designing what we need to in terms of the way the product needs to evolve. And that has to remain a sort of a core piece of what we're focused on. But I think at the same time that we do all of that, the technology revolution will transform our business. And so today it is about Marriott.com and SPG.com, SPG and Marriott Rewards, which will soon be merged into one platform. But how do you create a technology platform that allows us to know all of you and everybody that we possibly can who travels, so that we can recognize you when you come into the hotel, so we can market you so that you are loyal to us in a way that hopefully is different from the way you treat others. And that is about being a technology company. And in some respects, it's about competing not just with the Expedias and the Airbnbs, who are also technology companies, but how do you navigate that in a world in which a Google or an Alibaba or a Amazon have aggregated such extraordinary power. They're good partners of ours and we need to do business with them, but we have to be in a position where we have a direct relationship with our customers and that we're not always dependent on those platforms to deliver customers to us. And so that piece, I think, is the piece that will cause the most change.
And that's true, I think, for no matter what business you're in this room or in this world, the technological changes are affecting all of us. So there's lots of other things I'd like to ask you about the merger with Starwood, about the loyalty program, about the China and the travel policies, but I'm going to let you all ask questions. So raise your hand. Yes?
Thank you. This is a fascinating program. I'm always interested in the confluence of people and ideas. And I know, Arne, that when you were in Beirut, Tom Friedman was also reporting from Beirut in 1979 to 1981, and he says many of the same things you do about globalism and the need for remedies and people who are moderate and middle type thinkers, people who can bring people together. So it's more of an observation than anything else that you both had this seminal experience in Beirut in 1979, and you come out in many ways in the same place on many of the leading issues of in terms of the globe.
Yeah, I mean, Tom wrote a book called From Beirut to Jerusalem. I don't know if you read it. I actually think it's the best book he ever wrote. It is deeply substantive, and of course he came at it as a journalist with a whole lot more deliberate expertise and focus than I had. In some respects, I was an accidental tourist almost. Now, when I was there, we met with the Red Crescent Society, which was run by Fatih Arafat, who was Yasser's brother. We met with the Catholic Church, Maronite Church in Lebanon, the Orthodox Church. We met with a Muslim community. We met with a bunch of sort of academic faculty and social organizations. And again, coming away from that, you both get a sense of the enormous political complexity and sectarian complexity in a place like that, but you also get a sense for the power of a personal connection. I remember walking, it was actually a meeting at the Red Crescent. We were walking in one morning in Beirut, and there was a kid who looked like he was 14 holding an automatic weapon of some sort, AK-47 or whatever it was, he had the gun pointed at us as we came in, and he had a pretty unfriendly look on his face. And I was too young to be frightened by it, I was stupid enough not to know better, but smiled at him and sort of chuckled. He smiled back, and the personal connection immediately diffused the situation. And that still can work today, although there's got to be enough of a pause between the interaction and the firing of the bullet for somebody to actually make that work. And we've made it, I think, some respects harder than it was then.
Yes.
Coming behind you right here.
Hey, I'm going to stand because I'm still very young and early in my career, and I'd like to get more people to know me. So, my name's Derek Allgard. I graduated from Concordia in 2016 as a finance major, and I've been fortunate enough to have been under Chris Mason's wing. I have two questions for you. The first one's really simple. How much of that theater's ceiling was left at the end of your movie?
It seemed to be fine. Yeah.
I'm sure it didn't last long. My second question is towards you personally, because I want to know, as a young person, how you have navigated this throughout your career. But again, with the topic of nationalism, as the face of Marriott, how do you personally encourage the company to break down barriers, remove labels, and encourage intercultural and cross-cultural collaboration while retaining your own identity?
Well, there are a few questions there. We talk about inclusiveness all the time, and we have to walk inclusiveness. And so what that means, I think, is that our team, our company needs to be portrayed as a company that really values this and that reveals it too in the way that we present ourselves to the rest of the world and present ourselves in many respects to each other. And that's about having a diverse leadership team. It's about having diversity through the ranks. It's about celebrating diversity. It's about talking about diversity. It's about being relentless when there is behavior that's not consistent with that and saying it is unacceptable, and ultimately, if necessary, that there will be job consequences associated with that. Again, it's much easier to do that on the backs of a history which also did it. And that history would have used different words. We would not have talked about diversity and inclusion, for example, 25 years ago. But we did talk about opportunity for everybody. And that opportunity was available not just to white men. That opportunity was available to everybody, including white men, but to everybody. And to have that as the history makes it much easier to say this is something we're actually going to push much more aggressively. A sort of specific example of this, when Donald Trump was elected, in the fall of '16, our mother had just passed away just a few days before the election. And we of course were grieving her. It was time for her to go, but still a emotional time for us as a family. And I started writing a sort of small remembrance that we used at the funeral, which was the Friday after the election. And in writing it, I think Ruth was away someplace. I don't know where. I know I was home alone in the kitchen, and I had taken out these books of the history books that our parents had put together, and was reading that and sort of picking up some of the stories, which was pretty darn emotional. And then Trump gets elected, and I'm already in the mood to write, so I start to write an open letter to Trump, which I published on LinkedIn, I guess, and got reprinted in a couple of other places. But that letter, not very long, was written first for me, because I was thinking, okay, let's face head on the notion that we've got a new president coming in with very unorthodox points of view. Get your head around it. What would your recommendations be to him? And it was sort of a way of forcing me to think about it. But almost as important was writing that letter for our associates. Our LGBT associates particularly were palpably already fearful and thinking, what does it mean for me to be heading into this space? So I wanted to put a letter out there that basically said, your leadership at Marriott is thinking about these same things and making a statement for you about what we think this administration should do around that. And that letter was hugely important for our associates because they could look at it and they could say, we know Marriott is engaged in the conversation on our behalf. And it's a kind of example of how do you keep that sort of front and center for folks. And it's also, it had no scolding in it, but it's also basically a way of communicating to every other associate that we're going to be inclusive, no matter what. No matter what the winds of change are, we're going to be inclusive. That's our space.
Looks like over here.
Thanks, Carol. Leave Norderhow. To follow up on what you just shared with us, this is a question for both Arne and Mary. There's a book that came out, To the Ends of the Earth. It mentions Norwegian missionaries. That's part of your family. It's part of the family of a lot of those of us who are Norwegian Americans and beyond. Can you comment, both of you, either of you, regarding what that meant to both of you and what we individually can take as personal responsibility to move forward with that? Go Cobbers, go North.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Well, I do think that my brothers and I have always been more aware of and maybe in some sense more globally minded than many Americans have been, or many Americans were as we were growing up. Because we started our lives in a different country, and we had, well, Dan said we were normal. We weren't entirely normal. We had some cultural differences that we arrived with that took us a few years to adjust to. So I do think, you know, we have a brother who was in the State Department. My brothers have been much more global than I have been, always stayed in Minneapolis practicing. But I think we all four have paid much more attention to what's going on in the world. And we've also, I think for all of our lives, understood that to be Christian didn't mean what some people think it means today, which is to be conservative. But rather, you hear Arne and you'd hear me if I was talking more, that we understand being Christian is not inconsistent with also being liberal, socially active, inclusive. All these important values are also consistent with Christianity. And I think we learned some of that from our parents.
Yeah, I think that's right. This is maybe more a Lutheran comment than a missionary comment, but the thing I think we watched, probably not just in the missionary field, but all of us in, at least the older folks that are here a generation ago or so, is Lutherans around the world, missionaries around the world, Lutherans here, could have a strength of belief and still a willingness to accept. And both were really fundamental. If you didn't have this core set of beliefs, you actually didn't stand for anything. And at the same time, you know, and this obviously comes through loud and clear for somebody in Tokyo in the 50s and 60s, they had to find a way to navigate through a powerful Japanese culture. There's no subtlety in the Japanese culture. And say, okay, well, we actually believe something about the Christian gospel, which we are here to talk about, but we are also going to do it in a way which meets the Japanese where they are. I think if you fast forward to today and even look at what the dialogue is too often in the Lutheran Church, we can go in one direction or we can go in the other, and we don't seem to be doing both things very well. So we can accept everything, and too often really not seriously believe anything, or we can believe deeply and not really accept, but sort of pull into our cocoons. And you know, I tend to pull this immediately into the political sphere, but it's the same thing in the political sphere. We've got to find a way where you can say, no, damn it, you can really believe something. You can really have a point of view about politics or religion or whatever it is, and you can still talk to somebody who has a different point of view. And you can open your ears and try and understand what it is that they're saying, and create a connection there where it wasn't obvious that one was ever available.
We saw our parents live that every day, not only in Japan, but when they came back to the U.S., you know, we used to say our dad could talk to anybody. Didn't matter if it was Bishop Tutu of South America or South Africa or the guy who fixed our car.
Yeah.
He accepted them all.
Remember the guy with the foul mouth that lived across the alley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we want to respect your time, and it's 9 o'clock, so I think somebody's going to say something to wrap things up. Chris, is that you?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you for the interesting and relatable conversation, things that we've all probably felt. And although, Mary, I know you reasonably well, I can't believe even in second grade you were not sitting perfectly. I have a feeling the actual dialogue with the second grade teacher was, everyone, you need to sit like Mary Sorenson. That I believe a little bit more. Thank you all for coming, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Carol Hedberg in the back, who always comes away with a flawless program. Thank you very much. Also, our sponsors, our table sponsors, make it happen. The Boulay Group, Vantis Investments, Fredrickson & Byron, Marriott International, Norway House, Next Century Growth Investors, RDO Equipment, and RDO Integrated Controls, Target, and U.S. Bank. I don't think I forgot anyone. I'm pleased to announce that our fall edition of this is coming, and we're going to have David McClendon, the chairman and CEO of Cargill. We do not have a precise date yet, but that will be forthcoming, and if you want to be on our mailing list, let Carol know. We'll certainly take care of you. Thank you for coming, and have a great day.